Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GBNews.
Very good morning. It is 9 a.m. You're watching the briefing here on GB News with me, Darren McCaffrey. Coming up in the next 30 minutes, we'll be looking at potentially a civil war in the Labour Party between the leader and the deputy leader, Angela Rayner. Also, the government's going to crack down on drug crime. But is this all a distraction from what's been a bumpy few weeks for Boris Johnson and cabinet ministers? And also looking at the latest military build-up on the borders of Ukraine by Russia. Just how difficult could that situation get over the Christmas period? That and much more. But first, at 9 is the news with Rosie Wright.
A very good morning. This is your news at 9 o'clock. Boris Johnson is pledging to break up 2,000 county lines gangs as part of the government's drugs policy overhaul in England and Wales. Under the £300 million scheme, recreational users face having their passports or their driving licences confiscated. Police will also be able to seize dealers' phones to text their clients, warning them about the dangers of drugs. The 10-year commitment includes what ministers are calling the largest ever single investment in treating and rehabilitating addicts.
We've known probably for 50 years now that treatment investment is about 3 times more effective than investing in prohibition or policing it or any kind of supply side intervention. So we should basically be getting everyone who needs treatment for any addiction into treatment within days.
The Education Secretary, Naheem Sahawi, will make the statement in the Commons later about the murder of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. A major government investigation is underway into the safeguarding failings in the case. The Attorney General has also launched a review into the sentences handed down to the 6-year-old's killers. Arthur's stepmother, Emma Tustin, was jailed for life for his murder with a minimum term of 29 years. His father, Thomas Hughes, was sentenced to 21 years for manslaughter. Safeguarding experts say the whole system of child protection needs rethinking.
We, for 15 years, have been raising this, one government after another. The system doesn't work. Nobody is joining up the dots. The thresholds with social services are so high now, it really only is a blue light response.
One of the inventors of the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine has warned future pandemics could be more contagious and be more lethal. Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert says scientific advances made during the coronavirus pandemic must not be lost. Delivering the 44th prestigious Richard Dimbleby lecture, she also warned the Omicron variant may be more resistant to both current vaccines and natural antibodies. It follows reports that nearly 2 in 3 housebound people are yet to receive their booster jabs.
I'd like to finish on a high note, but the truth is the next one could be worse. It could be more contagious or more lethal or both. We cannot allow a situation where we have gone through all we have gone through and then find that the enormous economic losses we have sustained mean that there is still no funding for pandemic preparedness.
The former leader of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, has been jailed for 4 years for inciting dissent among the country's military rulers. She and her National League for Democracy party were removed from power in February in a coup. The ruling is the first in a series of cases brought against the 76-year-old Nobel laureate. Suu Kyi faces 11 charges in total, which have been widely condemned as unjust. She's denied all charges. Thousands of people who are still without heating and hot water are bracing themselves for yet another storm. The Met Office warned STORMBARRA will hit the UK on Tuesday with gale-force winds of up to 50 miles an hour. Yellow wind weather warnings are in place across England, Wales and Northern Ireland. Meanwhile, yellow warnings for snow are in place in southern and western Scotland. The Energy Networks Association said that over 3,000 homes were still waiting to be reconnected to power supplies after Storm Arwen first hit 10 days ago. TESCO warehouse workers and drivers are planning on staging a series of strikes in a dispute over pay. More than 1,000 workers are going to take industrial action in response to the company's offer of a 4% pay rise. The trade union Unite says this offer falls well below the current retail price index inflation rate of 6%. But TESCO said it was one of the highest awards made within the distribution business in the last 25 years. Workers are planning on striking for several days from December the 16th, with more action planned after Christmas. Every household in Wales is being given a free tree to plant. Deputy Minister for Climate Change, Lee Waters, kicked off the scheme by digging a hole for his own sapling. The £2 million plan will see Welsh homes either choose a tree of their own to plant or have one planted on their behalf by the Woodland Trust. The government hopes it will inspire families to plant more in future to help tackle climate change. You're up to date. I'll be back with your headlines in half an hour. For now, the briefing with Darren McCaffrey.
A very good morning. Welcome to the programme on this Monday. This is the briefing on GB News with me, Darren McCaffrey. Coming up over the next 30 minutes, we'll be looking at that latest really difficult, tricky situation with Russia and Ukraine, the build-up of troops there. President Biden due to speak again to Vladimir Putin. Also, internal rows within the Labour Party. The latest spat, it seems, between Keir Starmer and Angela Rayner. And also talk today about changes to judicial review. We'll be explaining that and much else over the next 30 minutes. As always, do get in touch. You can email me at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or indeed you can tweet us at GBNews. Keen to hear your views. We'll get to some of those a little later. But first, let's start with the top story today, and that is that the government is going to set out a new investment to crack down on drugs and dismantle 2,000 county lines, what the Home Office is calling a first-of-its-kind plan to stamp out the scourge of drugs, crime and violence that it brings to our streets. £300 million is due to be invested in pursuing and closing down gangs, with the commitment being part of the government's 10-year drug strategy designed to tackle both the supply and the demand for narcotics. According to the government, it will also see the largest ever single increase in investment towards treatment and recovery, in addition to other measures such as using drug dealers' seized phones to message the clients to discourage drug use. Well, let's get reaction to all of this and speak to Matthew LESH. He is the head of research at the Adam Smith Institute, a neoliberal think tank and lobbying group who previously called the UK's drug policy an embarrassment. A very good morning to you, Matthew. Previously, you branded it an embarrassment. What do you make of this morning's announcements?
Look, quite frankly, this policy announcement is just more of the same. It's more of the same drug policies that have failed us over the last 50 years. Since Lyndon Johnson famously declared a war on drugs, and we've seen kind of quite similar policies in the UK, we've had more drug-related deaths, we've had more criminal behaviour, we've had people going on to harsher substances. And unfortunately, the government's drug policy approach is entirely wrong. Last year, we saw 4,561 people die due to drug poisoning, and that's a year-on-year increase. That's people's lives being taken away unnecessarily soon because we've taken the wrong approach. We need to be treating drugs as a health issue, not as a criminal issue. We need to get people into the treatment that they need. We need to ensure that that we take the markets away from drug gangs by legalizing it to some extent. And if you want to know what the impact of that is, it's extremely successful. We've got our own experiment just over in Portugal where they did decriminalize drugs about 18 years ago, and it's resulted in a 2/3 reduction in opioid deaths. It's been an extremely successful policy approach, rather than using the criminal system, using it as a health system issue, reducing the amount of people going to jail, which is extremely expensive, and reducing the harms that come from drugs.
But isn't the problem with that, Matthew, to a large degree, actually public opinion, is in that it's a very difficult sell for the public because they don't want to see lots of drugs decriminalised. They think they are harmful and that ultimately they'd rather the government got tough on it.
Yeah, look, I think this is an extremely hard political sell, and I don't envy the government's approach here, but they've also got to remember that more people dying from drugs is also not a great political sell. More criminal behaviour is not a great sell either. So you've got to think about what are the results of the government's policy. Of course, many drugs are harmful to people. No one is denying that. That's why you want to take a health-based approach, particularly when it comes to opioids and heroin. We've talked in the past about drug consumption rooms as a way to reduce deaths. Everywhere which has introduced drug consumption rooms, all over Europe, all over the US, in Australia as well, have seen a reduction in drug-related deaths. They're an extremely effective policy that the government can introduce. That the Scottish government has said that they want to introduce into Scotland, where we've got some of the highest drug-related deaths in Europe. It would make a lot of sense to try out those kind of policies as well. Maybe the government's right. Maybe you do need to be quite harsh on the criminal gangs if you want to get support.
Oh, and Matthew seems to have frozen there, mid-sentence, talking there about, of course, the government's drug policy. We'll try and get back to Matthew if we can a little bit later in the programme, talking there, obviously making the case, wasn't he, for the decriminalisation of drugs, just as the government decides to try and tackle head-on, in many regards, particularly these county lines, the gangs involved in drugs. As I say, we'll try and get back to that a little bit later. Let's move on, though, to the tensions that have been escalating between the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, and the party's deputy leader, Angela Rayner. Comes after an aide to Mrs Rayner, Jack McKenna, had been suspended from the party. Mr McKenna's suspension comes just days after a surprise shadow cabinet reshuffle that Miss Rayner claims she didn't know was happening, or certainly didn't know the details. And although Keir Starmer has looked to smooth over relations with his deputy recently, Angela Rayner was apparently unaware of the suspension of her aide. So what precisely is going on? What does it mean for the leadership of the Labour Party? Well, delighted to say we'll speak to Stephen Barn, of course, former Labour MP, who joins us down the line. Good morning, Stephen. Here we go again in many regards. You can't get away from these stories, can we, that not all is well at the top of the Labour Party?
Well, when you say, I mean, good morning to you. When you say here we go again with the tensions between the leader of the party and the deputy. I mean, yeah, those of us who remember the relationship between Tony Blair and John Prescott, they weren't exactly, tied together at the hip. And similarly between, Margaret Thatcher and Michael Heseltine, I mean, good Lord, there was a fair bit of tension there. But I think what you've got with Angela and Keir is actually a massive difference of personality. I used to sit on the front bench with Angela, admiring her sort of ankle-high patent leather bother boots. And on the other side, you'd see Keir with his immaculately polished brogues. And it was indicative of the difference between the two of them. Keir was kind of buttoned up and, occasionally Angela would wear sort of virtually see-through tops. And it's a very, very different sort of person. But the main thing is do they actually complement each other? And I think that's the answer. They actually do. The business with Jack McKenna, I mean, Jack McKenna obviously, was a special advisor to Angela. He'd previously worked with Jeremy Corbyn. And I think possibly this is Keir, in Lisa Nandy's words, being the gaffer picking the team. And I think you've got to do that. And at the moment, I have to say, in terms of reception on the doorstep, in terms of our vote in Old Bexley and Sidcup, it's not going too badly. But the idea that there's a plot to defenestrate Angela, I think that's nonsense. What there is a fundamental difference in attitude and perspective. But for heaven's sake, the Labour Party actually does need to have these different perspectives and these different views. And Angela is a force of nature, and she was a brilliant education spokesperson. Absolutely amazing. I think we all admired that. Whether she's entirely cut out for the rigid discipline and the on-message requirements of being the deputy leader, whether she's entirely prepared to stop some of those extempore statements at late nights at conference is another matter. But she's a woman of great talent, and I think Keir is pretty shrewd enough to recognise talent when he sees it.
It is interesting on this Jack McKenna case, isn't it, though, Stephen, and you'll know this, that actually, obviously, we get to see ministers and shadow ministers all the time, but there are these quite important, sometimes very powerful figures, advisors who work behind the scenes, who can be as important to the politics of the party or any party than the actual politicians themselves.
Oh, absolutely crucially. I mean, you just have to go back to people like Alistair Campbell, who were massively more important than their actual title. And don't forget, I mean, in the Blair-Brown Wars, and I think we can charitably describe them as that, it was, Gordon Brown's special advisor, Charlie Whelan, who was the target. This is actually the classic Machiavelli playbook. If you read The Prince, which I think when I went into Parliament, I was advised to read two books. One was The Godfather, and the other was, Machiavelli's The Prince. What happens is, if you're after somebody, you actually attack the people around them. You attack the courtiers around them. And I think there's an element of Keir saying, well, look, Jack McKenna represents a particular strand of the party that we've moved away from. But that's not an attack on Angela per se. Angela's far too talented and she's far too good. I'm not entirely sure that she's the sort of person who listens a great deal to her special advisors anyway, to be perfectly honest.
In saying that, just finally on this, Stephen, the relationship, though, between the leader and the deputy leader is really important, particularly in the Labour Party, isn't it? Because they've actually both got their own mandates. In many ways, Keir Starmer can't do anything about Angela Rayner. She is there with the support of party members. And that means if they don't necessarily get along, it does become really quite tricky. It's not like what we see in other parties, isn't it?
Bill, I'm afraid you're right. I mean, I don't think the relationships between Dominic Raab and Boris Johnson are particularly fraternal or warm or cosy. I mean, I don't think they'll be spending Christmas with each other, believe you me. But look, I'll accept that there's some things which, in all honesty, we could have done a damn sight better. And I think just as, you remember, Jeremy Corbyn tried to abolish the position of deputy, mostly to get rid of Tom Watson, who was then the incumbent, and that blew up in his face. Similarly, there was a move just before the last conference to effectively demote Angela, and that blew up in Keir's face. And I think he's wise enough and shrewd enough to know that simply doesn't work. You can't abolish the position to abolish the person. I mean, that's pretty ludicrous. I'm still not sure why she wasn't completely in the loop on the reshuffle, why she was making an incredibly important statement, a really, really important speech on sleeves and what we were going to do about parliamentary standards and about morality within Parliament. And she should have been completely in the loop on that. I don't know. I'd be interested to hear what the reason is, but, I'm sort of fairly insignificant. Well, probably always was, but, I'm particularly insignificant now. But the idea is that you've got two people utterly and totally different in personality, in appearance, in outlook, united by one absolute burning ambition, and that is, quite simply, to see Labour back in power. There, you could not get a cigarette paper between them.
OK, fascinating stuff. I'm sure it's an issue we're going to come back to as well. Stephen Pound, as always, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this Monday morning. Now, the US President Joe Biden and Russia's President Vladimir Putin are set to hold crisis talks again today over a huge build-up of Russian troops on the border with Ukraine. 175,000 are believed to have assembled on the border, and US intelligence is reportedly warning of a potential invasion early next year. The crisis renewed fears that the standoff over Ukraine, the former Soviet republic that wants to join NATO, could spill into an invasion and a war on European soil. Well, let's speak to Sir Andrew Wood, former UK ambassador to Russia, who joins us this morning. Good morning to you, Andrew. Thank you very much. These talks, I think they spoke a couple of weeks ago, didn't they, Joe Biden, Vladimir Putin? I mean, what fundamentally is the concern here? Is it really that we could be seeing a conflict within weeks?
Yes, ultimately it would be that. I don't think it's in that situation exactly now. What the Russians are trying to do is to, if you like, bully the West and Ukraine in particular into the idea that Ukraine should be answerable to Russia in the first place. But there's a lot that could go wrong. Putin is in trouble politically in Russia, first. Second, I'm never quite sure how to describe it, but the situation in Belarus is a situation of a regime trying to re-establish itself by violence. And in Russia, we've had, in the last year and a half, a steady decline towards terror repression rather than support for Putin. And he must hope that getting something tangible from Ukraine would help to restore his real hold over the Russian people. So it's a very risky situation.
Very risky indeed. I mean, what, frankly, cards has Joe Biden, or indeed any Western leader, including Boris Johnson, what cards have they got to play to try and to dissuade Vladimir Putin from potentially doing this, when you say it may well purely, largely be for domestic purposes?
Well, it's for domestic purposes, ultimately, yes, but also because his leading ambition is to make Russia a world power again. Securing a hold over Belarus, which is very probable, will increase Russia's military reach within Europe. But in order to re-establish anything comparable to what Russia used to be, he needs to get a hold over Ukraine as well. So there is a long-term ambition of that nature. On the other hand, he has to face up to the fact that using more violence in Ukraine will cost Russian lives, because the Ukrainian army is much more effective than it was when he first invaded in 2014. So it's not it wouldn't produce a stable situation if he seized control of Ukraine. On the other hand, he can think that the West is pretty divided. I don't suppose he has much regard for the authority of Biden. And American policy is slightly too channeled, if you like. One is to maintain deterrence over Russia, but the other is also to try and reach some sort of stability between Washington and Moscow, which will allow them to manage more particular issues. So I think he's getting a divided message in Putin. Putin is getting a divided message. But at the same time, we would be madness not to support Ukraine. That certainly includes Britain. I don't think anybody wants a war, but there could be huge mistakes.
And just on that point, finally, Andrew, is that what do we do, particularly Britain? You know, this is potentially going to be, as we say, on European soil. I mean, just how far does the UK go to try and defend Ukraine's interests? I mean, we're not going to physically go to war with Russia. Sanctions don't really seem to make that much difference in recent years. I mean, what does Britain do? What does Boris Johnson do?
Well, I think sanctions have actually made a huge difference insofar as they've reduced enormous economic and therefore political obstacles for the Russian regime. They've not been decisive, but they have established a situation which the Russians would very much like to reverse. We could collectively increase those very considerably, and we, Britain and the United States and other countries, have a military presence of some sort in Ukraine as well. But we're all, I think, in a sort of guessing game as to what's really likely to happen. I don't doubt that the Russian army could sweep through to Kiev at the cost of bloodshed to itself, to say nothing of the Ukrainians. But holding on to Ukraine over the longer term would be extraordinarily difficult.
It's really, really interesting. It's one we're going to keep an eye on. Quite worrying, it must be said, as well. Sir Andrew Wood, thank you very much indeed for joining us for your expert analysis this morning. That's Sir Andrew Wood, former ambassador, UK ambassador to Russia, with a pretty stark tale there about what may well play out in the new year with that build-up of troops, that conversation happening between President Biden and Vladimir Putin today. We'll bring you the latest on what comes out from that. Now, back home, if you were reading the papers over the weekend, you'll have seen that reports that Boris Johnson wants to weaken the power of courts to overrule decisions made by ministers through the process of judicial review. At the weekend, the Sunday Times reported that the Prime Minister wants to allow ministers to effectively throw out any legal rulings that they do not agree with. It comes after a number of clashes with judges, such as the ruling that Mr Johnson's 2019 decision to rogue Parliament for 5 weeks was unlawful. I'm going to speak to political commentator Bobby Freeman, who is also co-founder of the political blog The Spoon. Good morning to you, Bobby. Just explain to us, first of all, if you can, kind of what judicial review is and how it kind of works at the moment.
Morning, Darren. So judicial review is the way in which people can challenge government decisions. So it's quite a high bar to overturn a decision that's made by the government. But if a decision is made that's unreasonable or that takes into account factors that shouldn't have been taken into account, or fails to take into account relevant factors, or if a decision is perverse, then for those reasons, it's able to get a government decision overturned. And so obviously it's something that the government is wary of. It doesn't like the courts necessarily saying that it's done something that's illegal, but it is, of course, an important check on the government's power, and that's why we have courts that are able to step in and say when the government has done something that it isn't allowed to do.
Much speculation this morning, that the government is looking at changing some of this to a degree. Their argument is that we're just simply reasserting the sovereignty of Parliament, and that's how our political system works, that Parliament in the end is supreme.
Yes, and it feeds into another story that's around today, talking about the government essentially looking at some court rulings and suggesting that it may take action to overturn them. So the Meghan Markle ruling, for example, is one that's being talked about at the moment, suggestion from Dominic Raab that went too far in suppressing freedom of expression and supported the privacy right too much. Now, I think there's nothing wrong in principle with a government legislating to change the law if it disagrees with what the courts say the law is. And I think it's important to emphasise there are different things that the courts and the government are doing, because it's for a court to say what the law is. It interprets the law as it is, and it says, well, that is what the law is, and that's how it stands. And if the government thinks that the law shouldn't be that, it's entitled to do something about it. So I'll give you one example. There was a case back in about 2006 called Barker and Chorus, where the House of Lords, what's now the Supreme Court, made a ruling about an entitlement to compensation for workers who suffered from mesothelioma. And the Labour government at the time brought in a new clause in the Compensation Act 2006, and that directly reversed the court's ruling, because it was thought it was wrong that the way the law was, as it had been interpreted by the courts, did people out of compensation. So the government does do that. But I think we have to be careful. We don't want to get into a situation where the government is routinely looking at every case on a case-by-case basis and sort of saying, well, we don't like that, we don't like this court's decision in this specific case, and so on and so on. And effectively, that would make the government the courts by itself. So I think in a limited respect, it's something that we've seen before and that is appropriate, but you don't want to be doing it all the time.
And what would you just finally say, Bobby, to those who would say, well, this is all about Brexit, this is all about Boris trying to get back at those judges who were terribly mean to him when he was trying to prorogue Parliament and all that sort of stuff?
Well, I think there may well be some truth in that's what lies behind this. There's clearly a bit of enmity, I think unjustified enmity towards the judiciary, who are just doing their job, and it's up to them to interpret the law. So I think we do have to be a bit careful with this. As I say, it's useful and right that elected politicians change the law to make the law what they want it to be. That's what we want politicians to do. But equally, we have to appreciate that judges in this country are fair and independent and do the job to the best of their ability to simply say what the law is. And I don't think we should be getting into the territory of suggesting that somehow the government should be wanting to mark their homework on each and every occasion that they give a judgment.
OK, Bobby, always appreciate your analysis. Thank you very much indeed. Bobby Friedman there joining us, talking about those potential plans to judicial review. OK, that is it for the briefing for this morning. I'm back again at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, but also at 3 this afternoon. Don't forget, Gloria De Piero is here at noon with the very latest political developments as we start a new week. Up next, though, it's To the Point with Patrick and Mercy. That's after we get the latest weather, and there's another storm on the way.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Well, let's have a look ahead to today's weather across the UK. It's going to be windy with some sunny spells and scattered showers across the southeast of England, where we'll start the weather forecast. The showers will possibly be wintry over higher ground, feeling cold in those northerly winds. In contrast, it will be cloudy with outbreaks of rain across the southeasts. That rain, though, turning heavy at times. Not looking great, is it there? It'll be windy as well. Let's move to South Wales, where it will also be windy and it will feel cold. There'll be sunny spells and some heavy blustery showers. Again, wintry over the hills. There'll be outbreaks of rain when we move over to the Midlands and some hill snow towards the higher grounds of the southern Pennines. This will clear eastwards with blustery showers following windy and again feeling cold, even for December. Outbreaks of rain and hail snow will quickly clear in the northeast with brighter and drier conditions then following. The odd shower is then still possible though, and again it'll be wintry over higher grounds. It'll be windy across Scotland, especially in the north and west, adding to that cold feel. There'll be sunny spells and scattered showers, blustery, wintry showers turning heavy at times. And scattered occasionally wintry showers will affect much of Northern Ireland, as well with some bright or sunny spells in between. It'll be wintry, windy and feeling cold as well. So not looking great over the next day or so, particularly with STORMBARRA due to arrive tomorrow as well.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good morning, everybody. You are watching To The Point here on GB News with me, Patrick Christie's, and Mercy Moroki, and we're here all the way through until midday, and we've got a bumper show for you today.
Yes, so make sure you get in touch with your views, as usual, on the things we're talking about today, GB Views at gbnews.uk, and we'll get to your views throughout the show. But first, let's give you the latest news.
Good morning, I'm Rosie Wright. Let's get you up to date. Boris Johnson is pledging to break up 2,000 county lines gangs. It's part of the government's £300 million drugs policy overhaul in England and Wales. Under the scheme to disrupt the rural trade in Class A narcotics, recreational users face having their passports or their driving licences confiscated. The Education Secretary is going to make a statement to MPs later today about the circumstances leading up to the murder of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo-Hughes. A major government investigation is underway to look at safeguarding failings in the case. Arthur's stepmother, Emma Tustin, was jailed for life for his murder. His father, Thomas Hughes, was jailed for manslaughter. One of the inventors of the AstraZeneca COVID vaccine has warned future pandemics could be more contagious and more lethal. Professor Dame Sarah Gilbert says scientific advances made during the coronavirus pandemic must not be lost. Delivering the 44th prestigious Richard Dimbleby lecture, she also warned the Omicron variant may be more resistant to both current vaccines and natural antibodies. The former leader of Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi, has been jailed for 4 years for inciting dissent among the country's military rulers. She and her National League for Democracy party were removed from power in February in a coup. The ruling is the first in a series of cases brought against the 76-year-old. She's denied all charges. Every household in Wales is being given a free tree to plant. The Deputy Minister for Climate Change, Lee Waters, kicked off the scheme, digging a hole for his own sapling. The £2 million plan will see Welsh homes either choose a tree of their own to plant or have one planted on their behalf by the Woodland Trust. You are up to date. I'll have more for you at 10 o'clock. Now, Patrick and Mercy.
Good morning, you're watching To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki and Patrick Christies, and we've got a show full of today's big stories, lots of discussion and opinion on the issues you're talking about at home. So here's what's on the menu today.
Yes, the government is pledging £300 million in a drugs policy overhaul. They say that it will help dismantle 2,000 county lines gangs, and it's part of a new 10-year drug strategy for England and Wales. The overhaul will put additional focus on treatment and recovery, but will this help to bolster the government's war on drugs? We'll discuss.
Yes, and the government has announced that the killing of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes, who was tortured and killed by his father and stepmother, will be the subject of a national review to protect other children from such evil crimes. Arthur's granddad has spoken today and said it's made him reconsider the death penalty. We'll ask what is the most fitting punishment for such crimes.
Yes, and the Omicron variant continues to strike fear into the hearts of governments for some reason, as pre-departure tests for all those arriving in the UK are made mandatory again. How much should we really be worried about this variant, and should we be changing our Christmas plans?
Yes, we've got all of that coming up and much more as well across the rest of the programme. And get in touch with your views, as usual, GB Views at gbnews.uk. But first, Patrick gives his views on the murder of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes.
Last week saw the sentencing of the depraved, evil parents of 6-year-old Arthur Labinjo-Hughes, who was terrorised, tortured and then murdered in one of the most sickening cases in history. I'm sure we're all haunted by the video footage of little Arthur, clearly badly hurt, struggling to drag his duvet across the living room floor, where he was forced to sleep. And the audio recordings of Arthur wailing, distraught at the fact that nobody loved him and that nobody would feed him. Ultimately, it was his parents, or stepmom, I suppose, that killed Arthur. And there is now an urgent review into the state of child protection services, and indeed calls for them to serve full life sentences. It has even reignited the debate about the death penalty. Where do you stand on that? Would you bring back the death penalty? I ask this because of the serious nature of the crime, but also for you to consider whether or not we did already bring back the death penalty when we introduced the lockdowns. I think lockdowns signed a death warrant for many people in this country and a delayed death warrant for many children and young people. During the first lockdown, the NSPCC charity saw a 23% increase in calls to its helpline. Dame Rachel D'Souza, the Children's Commissioner, has said that lockdowns may have played a role in Arthur's death by weakening child protection services. One of Arthur's uncles apparently sent photographs of the boy's injuries to the police, and it appears that nothing was done. Meanwhile, people are getting fined for not wearing masks. Priorities. Countless children who are largely unaffected by the coronavirus and more than likely had some form of natural immunity due to previous infection were trapped by coronavirus rules and regulations at home with abusive parents. And this time, their parents didn't have to worry about whether or not someone might see a cut at school, or a bruise, or a broken arm, or a black eye, or a fractured spine. Even now, abusive parents who knock their kids about will just have to call the school, say their child is going to be off for a week with COVID, and that's that. In fact, according to reports, around 200,000 children will be absent from school today. This is a massive red flag. We talk about lockdown causing job losses. We talk about lockdown damaging our economy. We talk about lockdown leading to NHS waiting times going through the roof. What about lockdowns killing children? And it's not just the fact that kids have been imprisoned with their abusers. Lockdown lit the fuse on the ticking time bomb of a child mental health catastrophe. 2,000 children are referred to mental health services every single day. The Children and Young People's Mental Health Coalition now estimates that 1.5 million of them will have new or worsening mental health conditions because of the pandemic. I read a report this morning from a parent who said their child's first word was mask. As we front up to the inevitable reality that this government is going to extend coronavirus restrictions into the new year for a COVID variant that, as yet, doesn't appear to have actually killed anyone or be resistant to our existing vaccine, as we stare down the barrel of authoritarian continental leaders in Europe, normalising lockdowns yet again, and we worry that one might come our way, we need to stand up for children. Children need adults. Children need people to go into bat for them. Children need looking after. And that's our job now, as the public. We cannot allow this government to write off an entire generation. Yeah, look, I think this is one of the major issues that's kind of been swept under the rug, really, the impact on kids.
Yeah, and there's that saying, isn't there, that you can judge a society by how they treat their most vulnerable. And of course, that entails children. And I think repeatedly, we were already failing a lot of children, the most vulnerable children.